Further ado, I'm Tom Adams. I'm with the policy advisor with the Ocean Project, and we're glad that everyone is with us today. We'll also have two other speakers, Andrea Densham with Shed Aquarium and Matt Mullin with the Marine Fish Conservation Network in just a little bit. But so let's get started. You know, what I'd say about this first slide is I've eaten at that restaurant. It's not very good. And what we really want to do is to get the senator outside with us, the voters. And so that's really one of the things we're trying to focus on to help you guys better do that with public officials who represent you. Okay, sorry. Okay, so basically, you know, the lofty goals, you're not going to understand everything, but what we really want is for you to leave here today knowing more than when you arrived. And I was thinking about it, and that really is kind of, I think, the goal a lot of you guys have for the guests that visit your institutions. You just want them to know more, care a little bit more, and be interested in doing a little bit more. So, you know, that's what we're hoping to do after that. Okay. Quick outline of the agenda. I won't go through it because everyone can read. The second bullet, the potential of zoos and aquariums, is where Andrea is going to speak, and then the case study on Magnus and Stevens is where Matt's going to speak a little bit later. Okay, so I couldn't find a good picture of me, so I used this guy instead. Hope you don't mind. So in this section, we want to sort of talk, you know, at a very basic level about, you know, the advocacy engagement that you can do with your guests. And, you know, in my background, I worked for Brookfield Zoo, Chicago Zoological Society for 8 years doing their federal government relations, which meant, you know, I was not on site most of the time, but every time I'd go out, I'd see interactions like this, and I was just amazed at the connections people make with animals. And that's a great time to talk to them about potential actions that they can take. It's you know, you'll hear a lot as the campaign season goes on of well-run campaigns bragging about their voter contact, how many voters they've contacted. Well, this is sort of the same thing for us. This is an opportunity like the politicians have to tell voters how great they are when they contact them and remind them to vote. This is our opportunity to contact our voters and get them to care about the animals that we care for and the needs that they have, particularly threatened and endangered species in the wild. So one of the things I recently came across that I found very interesting is some information from the Know Your Own Bone blog by Colleen Dillenschneider at Impact. And they did some surveys, and 70% of the people you see in the first bullet who visited one of a cultural institution, it's a little more broadly than zoos and aquariums, voted in 2016. And they found also that almost 62.5% are more likely to vote in the midterms. So what that means is the voters that politicians depend on to keep their jobs or to get their jobs are showing up at your institutions. And it's a great time to sort of make them educated on issues that can impact conservation and species and habitat in the wild, both in the United States and internationally. Okay, so I mentioned I worked at Brookfield Zoo. When I was there in 2008, we did a community and economic impact study. And one of the things that we did is we wanted to be able to go into elected officials' offices and show them on a bunch of different categories where people were coming from. This is basically yellow bus school visits. And I want to just show you something that's relevant to the next slide, which is basically this area that I'm kind of highlighting, these outer collar counties of Chicago. And I'll get to that in a minute. But what we were able to say with this slide is that people were coming from all over the state, which allows you to talk to representatives that aren't in your immediate market. And the reason that's important, we put a bunch of information together, and we actually by certain legislative districts in the state legislature, counted the number of students that we had coming to us. And this circled area, and with the highlighted name underneath there, the reason that's important is 2 years after this, and he helped us get, supported us in a package of about $18 million of capital improvements and repairs. He got elected to Congress, and so and he's still there. So the point is that by engaging local and state officials in a targeted way and getting them educated about your institution, your visitors, where they're coming from, it's sort of like cultivating a donor where you're doing it for a long-term relationship where they can help you as they climb, they being public officials, as they climb the ladder of influence and office. So, and again, I apologize if I'm going fast. We have a lot of slides and a lot of territory to cover, but we will answer questions if you have any, or if you missed anything that you want clarified. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Densham, who started with SHED last November. The reason we wanted to have her on is she's relatively new to this community, but has spent a career in government, both inside government and as government relations professional, mostly in healthcare, to sort of give her perspective about the potential that zoos and aquariums have to engage in policy issues. And I'm trying to take her off of mute. Okay. Okay, Andrea.
Yep. Can you
Good.
hear me now?
Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for Tom for having this opportunity to talk with everyone. And I'm really excited to be able to talk about the potential work that all of us can do in mobilizing the amazing tools in our toolbox to have an impact. And you can go to the next slide. So one of the things that Tom was talking about at the top was the level of engagement, and this slide highlights public trust folks have in different institutions. And you'll see that our institutions have extraordinary high levels of trust. When you think about all the media you've been hearing about what members of Congress and the level of trust that they have with them or with other elected officials, you'll see that there is no one that's getting close to 80%. And we are there on a consistent basis. So you'll see Zooms at 74.5 and aquariums at almost 76%. That's an amazing thing. And we have an extraordinary group of individuals that are coming through our institutions. Many times it's multi-generational, and they feel a deep connection to us as institutions. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much trust. You can go to the next slide. That said, they also don't see us as being partisan. And I think that's also really important because they see our information. There's a double-edged sword of that. One is that they come to us and they understand us as being neutral and nonpartisan. And I think that's extremely important and also an amazing asset. That means, though, that when we engage, we need to be very mindful about how we engage and to do so in a way that doesn't put this asset that we have right now in jeopardy. So you can go to the next slide. But it's an amazing asset, right? So what our visitors want, what our supporters in the community want to know is from us as science-based, as trusted cultural institutions, what do we think is best practice and what are our recommendations for next steps? And Tom was using this palm oil example, and I want to say a couple things before we play it. And one of the things that I think is, and coming, Tom gave a nice overview of where I come from and my experience doing advocacy work and public policy and government affairs work. One of the most amazing things that I see as an asset, and one of the reasons why, as someone who grew up doing environmental and conservation work, I wanted to work with the Shed Aquarium, is the opportunity it had to have an amazing impact with an amazing swath of not just folks in the Chicagoland area, but folks in the Great Lakes area generally. We're a trusted entity, and we can share really solid science-based information and encourage multi-generations of individuals and families to act as really strong assets in our communities. The other piece that I think is really important is that our institutions themselves have amazingly diverse skills. So from the researchers that work in our institutions to the amazing individuals who take care of our creatures and making sure that they're healthy and well, the amount of individuals that we can mobilize as content experts, as scientists, is amazing. And if we work well and thoughtfully to identify key points that we as institutions want to engage each year and aim our collective skills and assets in that direction, it is a very, very powerful thing. I've done a lot of work over the past 5 to 10 years around collective impact work, and have worked in a couple communities on that. And I think the assets that we have as zoos and aquariums to really implement the methodologies that have been proposed, many from Stanford, some from some other major foundations in the United States, to do collective impact work, we could have an extraordinary impact of moving things forward. But I think this, I'm going to have Tom play this little clip here, because I also think it's a great example of that.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, Andrea, because I had some notes and you pretty much said them all. One of the, we took a slide out because we didn't want to put everyone to sleep with a bunch of charts up at the beginning. One that came out indicated that 75% of zoo and aquarium guests expect or recommend or want you to recommend actions for them. And so to me, what that says is, you know, they're coming to learn stuff and figure out, once they're there, what they can do to help. So they want this sort of information that's going to be on this movie here. So let me
Yeah, 1 second before you go, Tom. I mean, I think that's right. We're seen as content experts, and I think it's really important for us to be really mindful about that. And it also means, though, that if we as institutions identify clear goals annually of what piece of policy or activity we want to move on, and are really narrowly focused on that, then when we're able to mobilize our entire institutions with our community partners, we can actually have a really significant impact. And I'm sorry, there you go.
No, that's great. That's a setup for one of the other clips that comes later. So here we go. This is from Zoo Atlanta, and it's on palm oil.
Hey Lynn, what's palm oil? Hey Riley, palm oil comes from the fruit of the African palm tree native to West Africa. It's actually grown all over the world now. But what's it used in? Palm oil is used in a bunch of different stuff. Because it's cheap, versatile, and uses 10 times less land than other oils, it's actually used in over half of our household products. Things like cleaning products, beauty care items, dog food, milk, snacks, and even candies. Palm oil sounds like a good thing. What's the problem? Palm oil does sound like the perfect product, but enormous areas of tropical rainforests, especially in Southeast Asia, are being destroyed at a rapid pace, which means our beloved endangered species like the Sumatran tiger, the wreathed hornbill, Malayan sun bear, Sumatran orangutan, and the red-blooded python are in trouble. Oh no! Can I help? Riley, the answer is in the palm of your hand. The next time you go to the grocery store with your family, make sure you use the palm oil app. That way you can buy products with sustainable palm oil. Sustainable? Sustainable is a big word we use when describing companies that have made the right steps to saving these animals. They're using their land well. We can actually all make steps to save these species. Thanks, Lynn. I'm going to go tell my mom right now. Bye, Riley. Bye, Lynn.
Yeah, so I just, you know, oh, there's that picture again, another one. I mean, I looked at I searched for a lot of clips, and that one, I think, just sort of hits it out of the park, because it explains the issue. It gives people concrete actions they should take. And if they really care about the issue and they want to try to find something that's going on in policy, you know, they can do that. Or, you know, they can help be connected to it, which I think is a role that zoos and aquariums should play. So now I'm going to move into the really exciting stuff here, which is, the technical details of lobbying. And we're not going to get too far into it, in the lobby laws, that is. First, there's I think a common misperception that a 501c3 nonprofit is prohibited from lobbying, and they're not, but there are legal restrictions on it. So like I say here, you're going to want to know before you get too far down the road. If you sign an occasional letter or something like that, a sign-on letter, which, like a lot of times AZA will do one on funding levels, and other institutions active on issues will do it on specific legislation. That's perfectly fine. And if that's all you do, you're well within your rights and you don't have to worry about it. But if you're going to dive in a little bit deeper, you're going to want to know the law. And from personal experience, you're going to want to have coffee. But here is, in a nutshell, what the IRS definitions for lobbying are. And again, if you're going to want to go farther into it, I would recommend consulting with, a lawyer on this. It's not very complex, but there are some things you're going to want to be aware of. But that said, 15% of your annual budget may be used for things that legally constitute lobbying. And what I always tell people is what a lot of folks think is lobbying is not lobbying. And I'll show you a clip of that in a second. So here are the two categories of lobbying down here below. And think about it in your own experience. If you're on a mailing list, say for the Sierra Club, and you get, an action alert that says, please tell so-and-so to vote no against HR 2, that's an example of grassroots lobbying. Or if they say, to contact the administration and tell them not to drill for oil and gas off the coast of Florida, that's a regulatory matter, and that also constitutes lobbying, grassroots lobbying. So if you're telling your guests or others in your community to take action, that is grassroots lobbying. Direct lobbying is when you make the same request and you do it yourself. And it's, for example, the message at the bottom would be something that either you're saying or telling your guests to say. That's lobbying. Now, to add one more bit to this, it's the amount of time and money you spend. So if you have somebody, if you're working on this and you spend 15 minutes one day and 30 minutes another day and an hour another day, that's how it gets added up. It's not that it went from Monday to Friday. It's the actual amount of time you're taking. So, I can't imagine, given, your budgets and the amount of even the most engaged institutions, I doubt are coming anywhere close to that 15%. There's a lot of wiggle room there. And that's why I'd say consult with counsel to make sure you know exactly what you're required to do. So in that last slide, it talked about, a specific issue, specific bill number or whatever. These are, I think, you could probably fill in the blanks here with examples from your own institutions, but this is education. So there may be legislation about climate change. There may be in the first bullet point, there may be legislation pending about the Everglades. There may be something about funding for salmon and Elwha Dam removal. If you don't mention the specific legislation, then it's education. So saying something like the bold material in quotes, that is education. And it can, it can then be connected down the road, or you can point somebody to a group that's working on these. But this does not get you in trouble in terms of the lobbying laws. This is completely kosher for a 501c3 nonprofit to do. So I mentioned a clip that I'm going to show you, and this is great because it's 18 seconds. It is nasty. It's really not, it's very negative, but it is nowhere in this do they mention any specific legislation. They're talking about something that Congress has done, earmarks, and they're trying to say no more earmarks. And they're saying to contact this person and say no earmarks. but they never mention any legislation. And so this actually, believe it or not, this organization spends tens of millions of dollars on ads like this, and they are all education under the law. So here we go.
John Culberson's been sober for years, but he's getting thirsty. He wants to bring back earmark spending in Congress. You know, wasteful spending that gives taxpayers a wicked hangover. Tell Culberson to just say no to earmarks.
So I almost wish I could hear the gasps and the from that. But that, again, you know, on your TV, especially if you watch cable news, you'll see ads like that all the time, and they are not lobbying. They don't count in either category. And if you've heard of the Citizens United Supreme Court suit, which really let a lot of money into the process, it really opened the floodgates for ads like that. So we're going to move on to the congressional authorization and appropriations process. And again, this is sort of a 30,000 foot, 40,000 foot overview of it. We'll get into more detail on some of this stuff in future webinars, but we want to give you a little bit of an understanding of just sort of how Congress is structured and how things work there in the limited time we have. So there are two basic processes that Congress does. One is they write checks, they fund programs, those are called appropriations. And the other is they create programs and recommend funding levels, those are called authorizations. And the easiest way for me to explain this is those are my parents many years ago. My father was very fashion forward there. But when we were kids, my dad would kind of encourage us to go out and do whatever we want, but he would never give us very much money for it. So my twin brother and I realized pretty early on we would ask him for permission to do something. So he was authorizing our behavior. He served the authorization function. My mother was less permissive, but all we had to do was say, Dad said we could do it, and she was much more generous with the money. So we would ask her for the money. So she appropriated money for us to go out and do stuff. So my mom was the appropriator, and my dad was the authorizer. And when you get into the nuts and bolts of Congress, the House and Senate each have an appropriations committee. They write funding bills there are 12 subcommittees that fund the whole government. In theory, they're supposed to pass 12 bills, but the last 10 years or so, they usually only pass these big omnibus bills you hear about, but they're the only people who make a decision about spending money. On the authorizing side, each body has about 20 committees, and they cover the whole government, jurisdiction, oversight of the whole government. They not only pass bills that create programs, they do oversight on the agencies that are administering them, and they do investigations as well. So that is, in a nutshell, that's the shortest version I can ever give about the basic structure of Congress. So what I wanted to give an example of here is the appropriations bills are introduced by the subcommittee, and they never go beyond that. They get approved and work up their way through the whole body. An authorizing bill gets a sponsor, and this is, you've probably seen the Schoolhouse Rock version of this. It gets introduced. In this case, we're going to use the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which governs commercial fishing, recreational fishing in U.S. Waters and oceans, as an example. And there's legislation that's pending now. It's been introduced. When it gets introduced in the House and Senate, it gets referred to a committee, and you can see which committees it went to. And then it gets referred down to a subcommittee who will hold hearings, and then they'll vote on the bill, and then it'll be sent back to the full committee for a vote, and then to the floor for a vote. And then you get to the point where the House and Senate have to pass the same version of the bill, and a conference committee is what everyone thinks happens. There's several vehicles. I could bore you to death about that, but I'm not. But that's sort of how the authorization process works. And the reason we want to talk about Magnuson-Stevens a little bit in this example is to give you a sense of how a bill gets, how a law gets made. I'm sorry about that. I've got a funky computer if that's popping up on people's screen. The origins of it. In the case of Magnuson-Stevens, it passed many years ago, and it comes back up for something called reauthorization, which is essentially an opportunity to amend it and modernize it and address problems that have arisen since it was last considered. So we're going to turn it over to Matt Mullin with the Marine Fish Conservation Network, who is tracking this bill that's currently in Congress, to give a little, I guess, hopefully what you'll take away from this is sort of an understanding of not just this particular act, but this is what is common to all legislation that gets passed. So Matt, I'll give it to you, and just let me know when you want me to cue slides for you.
Thanks, Tom. Can everybody hear me okay? So Tom, I was curious what picture you were going to use for me, and that's a good one. That's me red fishing down off of Isle of Palms and outside of Charleston, South Carolina. It's good time. We go every fall. So
I figured if we could have you or the fish in focus, we'd go for the fish.
No, we purposefully focused on the fish. That's right. Better looking. So my job today is to give everyone a real basic and general overview of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. As Tom said, it is one of those bills that authorizes, doesn't appropriate, but authorizes the laws around commercial and recreational fishing in federal waters. I want to give a brief overview of where it came from, what it does, and how folks on the webinar today can interact with it. So basically, after World War II, as technology advanced, specifically fishing technology, and more specifically commercial fishing technology in the 50s, in the 60s, and the early 70s, what Congress and others, and specifically coastal communities, started noticing is that there were some pretty large trawling fishing vessels, commercial vessels, from other countries were coming in real close to shore and fishing up, scooping up large amounts of fish that over time leaders in the U.S. came to see as theirs. And so over a couple of years that ultimately ended in 1976, Congress created and passed what is formally known as the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, but everyone calls it the Magnuson-Stevens Act, or MSA. It's named after two former U.S. senators, Warren Magnuson, a Democrat from Washington State, and Ted Stevens, a Republican from Alaska. And I think I wanted to mention that just because this legislation and every subsequent reauthorization of this bill, which technically has to happen every 10 years, has historically been very, very bipartisan. So this is typically the legislation that isn't that controversial. That seems to change, that has changed in recent years, but it is notorious for being bipartisan. So they passed in 1976, and the original intent of this legislation was to claim those fishing grounds off the shores of the US. And so if you look at a map of the US, they basically said from 3 miles to 200 miles off of every American coast, this law will regulate commercial and recreational fishing in that area. And we are taking back those fishing resources, the fishery resources, for the benefit of American commercial fishing interests. And so it basically kicked out all the fishing vessels. So it also created, the first thing it did was kicked out all those foreign fishing vessels. The second thing it did, and I think we can turn to the next slide here, Tom, is it created 8 what's called regional fishery management councils. So this is, the purpose of this was twofold. It was, the coasts are far and wide in the US, and it was just way too much for one particular body Congress or otherwise, to manage all the hundreds of fishery species out there. So they whacked it up essentially into 8 different fishery management councils. You see them there grouped by region. And what they also said is we want a pretty democratic process here. And so they designated each governor of each state that falls within these 8 regions. And they said the governor of each state has to designate members of the state citizens to sit on these regional management councils. And so to this day, each of those 8 fishery management councils are comprised of 3 members from each of those states and a representative of that state government. Now, the federal government is also represented in each of those councils through the National Marine Fisheries Service, or otherwise known as NOAA Fisheries, because it sits within NOAA, which is itself part of the Department of Commerce at the federal level. But it's those collective people, citizens of each state, along with the state government representative and a couple federal government representatives, those people collectively make the decisions on how to manage the fisheries that fall within each of those regions. So New York, for instance, they sit in the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. Those New York representatives work with folks from Delaware and New Jersey and Maryland and Virginia, and they make decisions on the fish stocks in federal waters off the Mid-Atlantic coast. And that's the same for all the other regions there. The main tool that they have is called the Fishery Management Plan. And that plan is basically a business plan on how they're going to keep fish stocks from getting overfished. Or if a fish stock or a species is overfished, how they're going to stop that overfishing and rebuild that fishery. So each of those 8 fishery management councils, they meet typically biannually or quarterly, sometimes more, sometimes less. It depends on the fishery management council. But they basically convene at various usually coastal cities within their own respective region and make these decisions on a pretty periodic basis. So there's a lot of thoughts, of course, on the council process and the council dynamic. As you can imagine, it is pretty laborious, and there's a lot of scientific data used. There's a lot of discussion, but I think it's purposefully slow and methodical in reviewing the science, the best available science, and making collective decisions. And they have votes on various measures and on their fishery management plans and the various aspects of that fishery management plan, and they change those fishery management plans from time to time depending on a variety of different things. So MSA originally introduced in 1976. I think we can move to the next slide there, Tom. It has been reauthorized twice. Once in 1996 and then again in 2006. And it is now up for reauthorization. And this is why Tom wanted to include this in the webinar. Right now, there are a variety of different fisheries-related bills in Congress that are active. One on the House side is specifically designated as an MSA reauthorization bill. That has gone through the committee process that Tom outlined earlier. That is passed out of the House Natural Resources Committee. It is awaiting floor time on the House of Representatives. And then there are a couple more specific standalone fisheries-related bills in the Senate, in the House too, but in the Senate. And we haven't seen a formal MSA reauthorization bill in the Senate. It's notable, but it doesn't mean that MSA can't get reauthorized with just on the backs of a House bill. But it's getting controversial, and it is getting partisan right now because most people, including the Marine Fish Conservation Network, think that MSA, as reauthorized in 2006, is largely working. You see some of the stats there: 41 fish stocks rebuilt, 2/3 of overfished stocks that have gone under rebuilding plans, under those fishery management plans that I mentioned, are making significant progress just in the last 4 or 5 years. And it is bolstered both commercial and recreational fishing industries and businesses. And it is largely seen as an international model in repairing your coastal resources and fishery resources off of a country. And so it certainly the Marine Fish Conservation Network and many others see MSA as working right now, but it has to be reauthorized, and not everybody sees it that way. And so people want to unwind some of the measures that were implemented in the 2006 reauthorization to make fish stocks more, particularly ones that are in trouble or even close to overfishing, but maybe not quite there yet, to access more of those fisheries. And so the main tools that were implemented in 2006, these things called annual catch limits, basically a cap on how many fish can be taken out of the water in any given time frame. Most folks see that particular tool as kind of the heart of success over the last 10 to 12 years. But it has frustrated other interests, some commercial, some recreational interests, because they want to catch more fish. But it is that tool, more than any other one, used and implemented in the last 10 years by those regional councils, that has rebounded many of our fisheries. I think by and large, it's always a rule of thumb that any law, I think, can get improved. And I think the Marine Fish Conservation Network sees it that way too. But the position of the network is generally, let's keep those core tenets that have given us so much success over the last 10 years and make some minor tweaks in this reauthorization this go around as we move forward, so we can continue this kind of era of success, if you will. So the last point I'll make is it's really important for everyone who has an interest in oceans or fisheries or coastal ecosystems to get involved at every level, but certainly the federal level. And given that the Magnuson-Stevens reauthorization is very active right now in Congress, having zoos and aquariums and museums and others in this field, getting engaged, paying attention, providing your opinion, and giving your input to elected officials, I think is a really important process, a part of the process, not only in Congress, but also in those, democratic regional councils. So Tom, I think I'll stop there. I think I hit most things. If I've forgotten anything, let me know. But I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, Matt, thank you very much. One thing I just wanted to have you talk about very briefly is something that I think is a really neat idea and something that could be appealing to some of the aquariums, particularly that are on the waterfront, and that's the working waterfronts legislation. And without getting into, where it is and the committee politics and all that stuff, could you just talk for a second or two about, the goal of the legislation and what you're hoping to accomplish? We'll obviously be sending out additional information, and if people are interested in that specifically, we can do that as well if they want to learn more or follow up with you guys. But
yeah, absolutely. So one of those smaller tweaks, and maybe in the eyes of some, not so much of a tweak, but in the reauthorization process, preserving those core tenets that I spoke about, but also tweaking it here and there. One of the things that the Marine Fish Conservation Network, and the network is a consortium of commercial and recreational individuals, organizations, associations across the country, including some aquariums. New England Aquarium, for instance, I believe is a member of the network. One of the things that the network and the network members recognize is that sometimes small boat commercial fishing interests and businesses and the coastal communities that those small businesses are a part of kind of get lost in the mix when it comes to federal fisheries management, of which MSA applies. MSA originally was focused on kind of your large-scale commercial fishing, and that notion, that dynamic, still definitely remains. And so sometimes in the process of making the making the sausage, making the fishery management decisions at the council level, some of those smaller boat guys and gals in those coastal communities sometimes they don't lose out, but they kind of get lost in the mix, I think is the best way to put it. And so the network has 5 policy positions. One of them is better standing up, better promoting the interests of these smaller boat commercial fishing businesses and even recreational charter boat fishing businesses and their coastal communities in the fisheries management process. And so that effectively, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, Tom, but that effectively is the notion behind this policy that the network is actively promoting within the larger MSA reauthorization conversation in Congress right now.
Great. All right. Thanks. I wanted to make sure that we got that in there because I think for some of the people on the webinar, they, in their communities, these may be their neighbors and friends and whatnot. So we're going to move into communicating on public policy, and this will go fairly quickly. But I wanted to talk about the image on the screen. This is something that the Ocean Project worked on to try to get President Obama to create some marine national monuments, particularly in the Northeast, which subsequently happened. You'll see something about that in a second. But this is an example of education, and after he did it, we did something where we thanked him for actually doing that. That is again education, okay? Because we weren't talking specifically about do this, please. But some of you may see your institution on there, and we thank all those who signed on. So here's the next clip, and what I want to say about this is from the Mystic Aquarium that was very instrumental in getting the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts National Marine Monument designated. And I have that on the authority of the people in the Obama administration that said they really helped push it over the line. And there's a longer story, and we hope to share that on the May 4th webinar about everything they did. But this was a video they showed to their guests at their show, and it was supported by several other things like a table and getting people to sign postcards and all that other stuff. But the interesting thing about this is they did it in August in 2016, and at some point while on vacation, President Obama's climate advisor visited Mystic and saw this and came back to the White House from vacation raving about this and really helped. He became a champion internally, and it wasn't even an issue for him. So that's why these videos that you do, you never know who's going to come and see it. So I will click it on now.
Imagine an ocean world with undersea canyons that are deeper than the Grand Canyon and underwater mountains that rival the Rockies in size and majesty. An ocean world filled with amazing creatures. This special place can be found just 150 miles off the coast of Cape Cod. It's called the New England Coral Canyons and Seamounts, and President Obama is considering protecting this area forever as our nation's first marine national monument in the Atlantic Ocean.
I've been working in this area on and off for the past 30 years. And every time I climb into a submarine or view the screen on an ROV, it's like taking a walk through Dr. Seuss's garden.
Forests of ancient corals thrive in the canyons, while whales, dolphins, sea turtles, and seabirds feed in the waters above.
This area is highly diverse. The animals that live there are fragile, and they're very sensitive to human disturbance.
Join Mystic Aquarium in its efforts to protect New England's ocean treasures. Go to mysticaquarium.org and make your voice heard. Together, we can protect this ocean treasure for future generations.
So there's so much right about that. And I know we're getting short on time and we got a few more slides to get through. So we're almost to the end. But I think what was great about that is, you know, they were telling their guests, you know, what they could do to help. You had their scientist who was largely played a big role in it, clipped in there. So, you know, you're promoting your science and just, you know, more good images in that clip than I have time to get into.
Hey, John, can I jump in just for a quick second?
Yes.
This is Andrea. I think that's a great example of how we can mobilize the different components of experts and skills that we have in aquariums and zoos. Our videographers, our communications teams, and our PR teams, our marketing teams can all develop for us when we identify a core issue we want to raise up. Whether for us it might be something in the Great Lakes, for you it may, for the rest of you it may be coastal issues, or something around your zoos in your local communities. Identifying that issue, figuring out how you can focus your institution on amplifying that message in a really clear way, as that one just did, and then working with your partners. Because the other piece that was really helpful there is that you'll see at the end of it, it identified a number of community partners and NGOs that the aquarium was working with. So being able to identify a core issue, figure out how you focus your institution and all the extraordinary skills it has out there, whether it's with schools or when it's out teaching youth or small folks like this piece is going to talk about, or whether it's sitting down among other scientists and working with other NGOs. We have an incredible amount of skills. For someone who's worked in a different space, I will tell you, we would have loved to have the assets you all have and to be able to speak in a trusted way with as many individuals multi-generationally as we all can do in zoos and aquariums. And I think this next piece is going to be able to highlight another avenue for that. So I'll stop talking, but I just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks, Andrea. And those were my closing remarks. So this next one is from the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and it cuts across a lot of those same things that Andrea was saying, but it's highlighting sort of an outreach, youth outreach and training engagement program that they have, but it gets into a lot of the different areas and promotes a lot of different things. So here we go.
The oceans and humans are inextricably interconnected. Here in Maryland, human and environmental factors such as historic overharvesting, sedimentation, and disease have caused a dramatic decline in the oyster population of the Chesapeake Bay. Youth are a strong voice for environmental change, and through programs at the National Aquarium, they are making a difference. In the Aquarium on Wheels work-study program, high school students from Baltimore meet after school to learn about the aquatic environment.
Aquarium on Wheels program, we make a play involving the Chesapeake Bay.
We write the script, we make the costumes, the props, and the backdrop. And the play is usually about an environmental or a conservational issue.
Here at the National Aquarium, we are doing a lot of things that are trying to rebound these oyster populations, making sure we're planting trees and things that reduce runoffs and chemicals that go into the bay and harm these populations of oysters.
The National Aquarium is located in Baltimore's Inner Harbor, which connects to the Patapsco River, which leads to the Chesapeake Bay and out to the Atlantic Ocean. Oysters are a vital part of this massive ecosystem. As oysters feed, they pull in water which may contain sediment. The sediment is trapped in mucus by the oyster and deposited at the bottom of the bay, removing the sediment from the water column. The result is clearer and healthier waterways.
Because they are part of the food chain, we need to protect them in order to keep the food chain going.
They are the base of the history of economy here in Baltimore, and it's unthinkable of how life would have existed here 100 years ago if we didn't have oysters.
The students will visit the Phillips Wharf Education Center on Tillman Island, which is investigating oyster diseases. There, they will learn more about the effects of oyster diseases and help grow our local oyster population by collecting seed oysters from oyster gardening sites, measuring and counting the young oysters, and placing them in the bay in oyster restoration sites.
Baby oysters, if they don't have a hard surface to land on, they'll die. So helping to create hard surfaces at the bottom of the ocean can help oysters to live longer.
So what we could do is dump dead oyster shells in the bay so the speck can have something hard to attach to.
Maintaining these oyster populations and the overall health of Chesapeake Bay is so important for not only Baltimore, but everything in Maryland and along the Chesapeake Bay. Getting out in the community with the kids and things like that in our plays here, the National Aquarium, have just been tremendous. And all the things reflect back to Chesapeake Bay and our own habitat here in Baltimore. So I think that's the coolest part about it.
Together with the students of the Aquarium on Wheels program, we will make a difference for the oysters of the Chesapeake Bay. The future of the oyster population is truly in our hands.
So just to, surmise back, it's same thing, a lot of great images, really a great promotion for a program that's engaging youth. It also gets to what I think is one of the great assets that our institutions have, is that our audience is as diverse as our communities for the most part. And most of the conservation groups, and I've worked for three of them, the membership are, 40 plus years of age and white for the most part, which even though my pictures haven't been in here, I definitely qualify for. So there've been a couple of questions about what's education and what's lobbying. And I think this next slide ties it together. These are all going to be from the Seattle Aquarium. This is to help the Puget Sound, restore corals, protect cetaceans, and ocean acidification. There is legislation pending on several of these things in Congress and have been for a while. And as long as you're not saying directly that I urge, tell your congressman to vote a certain way on this, on HR 2, the Motherhood and Apple Pie Act, it's education. And I know these don't show up very big, and I know that in terms of the text and whatnot, and we'll try to fix that when we send out future materials. But I think most institutions do this in some form or another. These were all pulled down from their website, but even the signage you have in the park is educational. And this has just been transferred to a different format, and obviously is highly visual. And, with social media, you can really distribute these a long way. But this is what education is about. And one of the questions was about the video from the Mystic Aquarium. They never said, urge the president to do this. They said he was considering doing it, and it's an area worth protecting, in our opinion. That's education. It's sort of like that clip on earmarks earlier. It probably seems to the average person that that's lobbying, but it's technically not in the eyes of the law. So just a quick thing, because we are right up to the end, and I know everybody's dying to get back to work, or at least start their weekends. The Ocean Project is right now, with these 3 aquariums, has started a pilot project to test messaging on fisheries issues, and where the public support for it is, and what messages work. The most important part of this slide, and I'm not going to go through it. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. The most important part of this is down here. This last paragraph, it sort of explains what we're doing. And I think it's really cool. And at least I think 1 or 2 places, they're actually going to be serving seafood that, that they're putting a conservation message toward. And that kind of gets back to what Matt was talking about with Magnus and Stevens, in that, the idea behind it is that we manage fisheries in a way that there's always fish out there to be caught and enjoyed. And the tension right now with that bill is I think people want to go back to a day where it was more of the Wild West, and there wasn't as much science put into managing fish stocks, which could return us to where we were before. Okay, so a quick moment here about existing resources. Andrea talked about this. That's why I said she got my finish, but about the resources you have and the key talking points. And this image here is, I think, from an advocacy and engagement standpoint, one of the biggest assets you have is that the interaction people have with animals is something that nobody else who does this and works on these issues has. But, you know, Andrea went down on a lot of this stuff right here. And the May 4th webinar, what we're hoping to do is to take it from just giving you a sense of how Congress works in a very high level, is to begin to talk about how you can utilize these resources in a way to impact policy issues that, you know, fit your mission and shape, and doing it in a way that's safe. I mean, you know, there's times you can get engaged on an issue, and I had this happen in a past position where a company got out in front on an issue that got square with some of their customers. They had a big grassroots effort against them. It became basically a crisis communication effort, and it drove them out of working on the issue we were going to do. So one of the things that's always important is to know not just your audience and how it fits your mission, but are there, you know, partners in your community or interest in your community that are going to, you know, be very strong in opposition. And that's one of the main things we want to work with you guys on as we go forward. Again, this goes back to sort of some of the stuff Andrea was talking about. You know, we're going to distribute this. You can go back and look at this if you want, but there's a lot of great message opportunities that you saw in the 3 clips from Zoo Atlanta, Mystic, Aquarium, and the National Aquarium. So again, if you have this, when we send out a PDF for this, there should be links to the top lines here. It's talked very quickly about Spitfire strategies, which wasn't mentioned on this, but it's a great resource for people who are just contemplating getting in to doing this sort of stuff. I mentioned sort of know your blind spots and where the potential, this discover your activation point. One is, whoops, nope, that's not what I wanted to do, sorry. The discover your activation point gets into that and will help you figure out the best way to engage. Down on the bottom, the Ocean Project is where you'll find some more information on the stuff we're doing on fisheries, and Conserve Fish is the link to the website for Matt's organization. And a lot of you probably get Know Your Own Bone blog from Colleen Dillenschneider, which has a lot of, it's data driven, but it's got a lot of great information on there, and we certainly used it for this presentation. So we're to the end. If you need to go, that's great. We understand. We thank you for joining us. I want to thank Matt and Andrea for helping us out as well, and also Bill Mott and Sam Mankiewicz at the Ocean Project for the work they did on this. If you want to stick around, we're going to be here till 2:30. We'll be happy to take questions. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to contact me at that email that's on there, or through the Ocean Project and there as well. Again, thank you everyone for being here. You will get an email from us next week with some more information. And we hope you'll be able to join us again on May 4th, where we'll really start getting into strategies of how to use your resources and the unique position you have in your communities to engage on policy issues in a smart and effective way. So if you have to go, we understand. Again, thank you. If you want to stick around for questions, happy to have you. Thank you all for joining us.